Hey Chevra, what's going on? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Nun Beis of Masechta Ayruvin, Daf 52. Like the main sugya of today, I guess I'll say, is like more of like kind of this idea of being stuck in the middle of nowhere, kind of taking it. We referenced this with this Mishnah yesterday about some guy who leaves his house and then he's going to go to this other house that he owns and kind of turns back. So is he able to be Konesh Visa in the middle there and then walk to his other house on Shabbos? So that's really going to be the main kind of sugya of today. We're going to start on Daf Nun Beis, Amud Aleph, 4 lines into the page. Amr Rami Bar Chama, says Rami Bar Chama, Hari Amru, they said, Shavas Yesh Lo Daled Ames. So if a guy goes to the place where he wants to make his Eruv Tchumen, and he waits there until Shabbos begins, so then he has Daled Ames. Right, meaning from the place where he's Konesh Visa, he has Daled Ames, his Machlokas, is it, in any direction, maybe he's in the middle of 4 Ames, he's in the middle, or maybe he has 4, maybe like Rabbi Yehuda could choose one direction, whatever it is, he has Daled Ames, okay? And then in addition to his Daled Ames that he has, so then he has 2,000 Ames in any direction. Hanosen Eseruvo, Yesh Lo Daled Ames Olo. The question is, somebody who kind of leaves bread there and then goes home, so does he also have Daled Ames surrounding where that bread is or not? Amar Rava, says Rava Tashma, come in here. Lo amru ma'arvin bepas elo lahakal ala asher shlo yetze v'yariv b'raglav. The whole point of being able to be ma'ariv bepas is as a leniency for people who can afford to leave some food somewhere. Now, v'amart ein lo, and if you say that he doesn't have 4 Ames, that the 4 Ames is only reserved for people who go there and wait until Shabbos begins, but if you leave food there, you don't have the 4 Ames, well then, hai lahakel lahachmihu, then how is this a kula? It's a chumrah, right? Meaning if the whole point of being able to make an eruv with bread is as a leniency, so for people who can afford it, they can, let's say, just send their son to go put it there for them. So then it wouldn't be that much of a leniency if they lose the ability by doing so to have an additional 4 Ames around the eruv. Now we also saw earlier, a few weeks ago, about Rava's opinion that wherever the Eruv is, there's Daled Ames around there. So I guess this would be in line in that. But the Gemara seems to be saying Afilu Achi, but you can still argue that even so, Nichale, it's still a leniency for this fellow to be able to send some bread with somebody else, with a shliach, even though he loses out on the Daled Ames that would be around the bread, it would still be a leniency for him. Because he himself doesn't have to schlep out there and wait for Shabbos to begin. So, meaning Rava wanted to argue that it must be that even when he leaves bread there, even if he sends a shliach to leave bread over there, if we say that he loses out on the ability to get the Daled Ames, well then it wouldn't be much of a leniency. We know that the whole point of being able to be making an eruv with bread is a leniency in the first place, so it wouldn't be much of a leniency if he loses out by doing so on the 4 Ames that he would get by going himself. However, we could still argue that even with losing out on those Daled Ames, it's still a leniency, because sending somebody else to do something for you is still going to be much easier than schlepping out yourself. Chevre, we get to a new mission over here. So if you have a fellow, okay, let's call him Ayruvin, and he lives in a certain city, and there's another city 4,000 Ames away, okay? So then he's going from, city A to city B that's 4,000 Ames away, and his friend said, hey, you better turn back, it's super hot out there. So mutter leilech v'chobne iro asur in divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda says that the next day on Shabbos he's nonetheless able to walk over to that next city that's 4,000 Ames away, even though he never actually, made an eruv there. After all, he turned back right away. Reb Meir Omer, says Reb Meir, kol shu yachol la'arev v'lo erev arei chamar gamal. Says Reb Meir, if somebody's able to make an eruv but he doesn't, right? So such as this guy, once he turned back home, he theoretically could have taken some food and made an eruv, but he didn't. So this is going to create a chamar gamal situation where he's like that fellow who's trying to escort both a camel and a donkey, and he's stuck in the middle, and basically he's going to be able to walk in the area between his house and the halfway mark to the next city, i.e. where he could have made the Eruv to go to the next city, he could walk in the area between his house and where his Eruv would be, but he can't walk past the Eruv and he can't walk past his house, meaning on the other side of his house. He's kind of stuck in the middle because we don't know which, where his Shvisa is. Is it in his house or is it where the Eruv would have been? Says the Gemara, Maishna Iu Umaishna Inu. We saw this yesterday. The Gemara asks, how come he would be allowed to walk to the next city on Shabbos? This guy who was going to go to the next city before Shabbos and then turned back and never actually made it, and he never made an Eruv either, yet we say that he's allowed to walk to the next city that's 4,000 amos away on Shabbos. But we say that the rest of his city is not allowed to do so. What's the difference between him and the rest of his city? He didn't make an Eruv after all. Rav Huna says, what are we talking about over here? It's talking about where this fellow owns two houses, one in city A and one in city B. And between them are two Tchum Shabbos, i.e. there's 4,000 amos between them. So this fellow, once he left his city to go travel to the next city, so now he's traveling, and essentially, you can argue, he's stuck in the middle of nowhere with no food. So Havale Ani, he's, a poor person, again, a poor person in the context of Ayruvin being somebody who's stuck in the middle of nowhere without food, not necessarily somebody who doesn't have a lot of money in his bank account. Now everybody else who's at home, the rest of his city, they're all wealthy, i.e. they all have food that if they wanted to make an Eruv and be Kona Shvisa somewhere, then they could have taken food and put it there. This fellow, on the other hand, had left his city to go walk to some other city and was left in a place where he didn't have any food with him. He wasn't planning to make an Eruv, he was planning to mamash travel to the next city for Shabbos. So then his friends say, hey, you should really turn back, it's not a time to travel right now. So then, we treat him as though he's basically somebody who's stuck in the middle of nowhere, and he can be Kona Shvisa halfway between the two cities just by thinking so. Just like we learned, somebody who's traveling, right, and there's a tree up ahead, he can be Kona Shvisa by that tree that's ahead of him. So here also, this guy left his city to go travel to another city. At that point, he's considered an ani, somebody who's in the middle of nowhere with no food, and therefore he could be Kona Shvisa by that 2,000 amma mark, and that would allow him the next day to walk all the way to the next city, and that is why we permit him to walk to the next city, because we treat it as though he was Kona Shvisa by the 2,000 amma mark, even though he didn't actually do it. He didn't even, so the assumption in the Mishnah is that he actually is saying something. There's different ways to understand it. Some ways have questions, some ways have less questions. So for now, the more transparent, the clearer way to understand it would be that he actually said that he intends to be Kona Shvisa by this 2,000 amma mark, and that he's allowed to do that because he left his city to go travel to another city, finds himself in the middle of nowhere. Somebody says, hey, you should really turn back. At that point, he's allowed to say that he intends to be Kona Shvisa by the 2,000 amma mark, so that the next day he can travel to the next city, even though he didn't leave any bread there and he didn't wait there until Shabbos begins. Tani Nam Yochel, we also learn in a brisa like this: Misheyesh lo shnei batim, somebody who owns two homes, uvenein shnei tchumei Shabbos, and between them are 4,000 amos. Kevin she'echzik baderech, once he leaves his city to go travel to the next house, Kona Eruv, divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So once he leaves his city to go travel, he is Kona and Eruv. Great. Yasser Akain, Amr Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. Now, Rabbi Yehuda's son Rabbi Yossi, not Rabbi Yossi Ben Chalafta, who we've been talking about up until now, that we paskin like, no, this is Rabbi Yehuda's son Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda. So he says you can even take it one step further. We're going to have to understand now. There's going to be machlokes between Rabbah and Rav Yosef about what this means that he's taking it one step further. What's the nafkamina? But he says afilu mitzo chaveru, even if his friend found him va'amarlo and said to him, Lin po, stay in this city. Eis chamahu, it's too hot outside. Eis tzinahu, it's too cold outside. Nonetheless, lemachar mashkim v'olech, the next day he can walk to the next city. So the important thing for us right now is that we see that according to Rabbi Yehuda, right, that this is exactly the case that we're talking about. That a guy owns a house in two cities. There's 4,000 amos between each city. He leaves his city to go travel. He ends up turning home. He's nonetheless allowed to travel there the next day. Now we have to understand what exactly is machlokus between Rabbi Yehuda and his son Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. So Amar Rabba, Lomar Kule Amalo Pligid Tzar. So Rabba says that everyone agrees. Both Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda and his father Rabbi Yehuda agree that he would have to say verbally that he intends to be Kona Shvisa halfway between the two cities, after whatever, at the 2,000 amma mark. Ki plige, the machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda is lehachzik. Does he actually have to have left his city? That according to Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda, he says, what does Rabbi Yehuda say? He says, right, kevan shehechzik baderech. According to Rabbi Yehuda, he says, kevan shehechzik baderech, that he actually has to leave his city. Whereas according to his son, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda, he wouldn't actually have to leave the city. Right? Somebody who owns those two homes, even just from his city, he can just say that he intends to be Konesh Shvisa halfway in between. Rav Yosef Amar, Rav Yosef argues in Rabbah, and he says, Lahachzik t'chuli amalo pligi d'tzarech. No, everyone agrees that he would have to leave the city. Both Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda agree that he would have to leave the city. Ki plige lomar. What the machlokas is, does he actually have to say something? Rabbi Yehuda would say he has to say that he intends to be Konesh Shvisa. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda would say that he doesn't actually have to say anything. Once he left the city, it is enough. The Gemara asks, like who does the following statement of Ula go? Okay, what does Ula say? Somebody who leaves his city to go travel, and then his friend tells him, hey, go back. It's not a good idea to travel now. He's both considered returned, like he returned to his city, and also muhzak, and it's also treated as though he's on the way and traveling and outside of his city. So the Gemara says, one second, if we're saying that he's considered like he's back in his city, then why are we saying it's muhzak, that it's kilu, he's already left his city and he's traveling? If he muhzak, and if we consider him like he's left his city and traveling, well, the lama muhzak. So then why are we treating it like he's returned to his city? Like either he's in his city or he's outside of his city. He's not both. So this is what it means. Afal pi shemuchzar, even though he turned back and went home, muchzak, we nonetheless treat him like he is traveling. So come on, who's that like? Now the assumption is right now that when we're saying that he's muhzar, that he was like returned home, it's mean that he didn't say anything, not like he left and he went home and it's completely, like everything was reversed, nothing ever happened. He didn't say anything or nothing like that, and nonetheless we're saying that it's kimuchzak, that we're treating it as though he left his city and he's traveling and he would nonetheless be able to be Konesh Shvisa in the middle without having said anything. So who's that like? So Rav Yosef, Baliba de Rav Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. That's like Rav Yosef according to Rav Yosef Rabbi Yehuda. It's like Rav Yosef who says that everyone agrees, both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda agree that he would have had to have left the city, and we're saying he's kimuchzak, if we're treating it as though he's left the city. However, he's also kimuchzar. He's also like he went home, i.e., he didn't say anything. It's like completely like he was home the whole time, he didn't say anything, and nonetheless we're saying that he's Konesh Shvisa, so that is like Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, who says, according to Rav Yosef's understanding, that you would have to leave the city, but you wouldn't have to say anything. Okay? Rav Yehuda bar Ishtasa, Aisile Kalkala de Pere, Rav Nosson bar Oshaya. So Rav Yehuda bar Ishtasa, so he brought a basket of fruits to Rav Nosson bar Oshaya. Okay, very nice of him. Wonder what he brought. What do you guys think he brought? Apples? Maybe. Maybe he brought apples. Okay, maybe he brought apples. It's very nice of Rav Yehuda bar Ishtasa. Kava Ozil, and then after he delivered the apples, so then when he was leaving, so Shavka Adonach's Darga, so Rav Nosson bar Oshaya, he waited until Rav Yehuda bar Ishtasa left one step away from the house. Ki'ilu, he started traveling, so to speak. Amar le bisacha. At that point, Rav Nosson bar Oshaya said, hey, why don't you stay by me and sleep here tonight? L'machar k'dim ve'azil, and then tomorrow you will go home. So what do we see? We see something very interesting. We see that basically what happened was, they did a hack. That you had Rav Yehuda bar Ishtasa, he had 4,000 amas to get home, right? That's an important point, that they live 4,000 amas away from each other. So it was 4,000 amas for him to get home. Now, so what they did was, Rav Nosson bar Oshaya said, hey, or he basically just waited for him to take a step, just one step away. And once he already took a step, then it's ki'ilu, he was muchzak, right? He already left. He already is on his way, he's traveling, now he's stuck in the middle of nowhere with no food, because at which point, Rav Nosson bar Oshaya says, hey, why don't you stay here? Okay, and then tomorrow you'll go home, i.e., by simply leaving the house and, starting his journey, that was enough to enable him to be Konesh Visa halfway, halfway along the journey. Kiman, who's that like? So, Rav Yosef, Alibud Rav Yosef Bar Yehuda. So that's like Rav Yosef and like Rav Yosef Bar Yehuda, right? Because he didn't say anything. Right? Rav Yehuda Bar Ishtasa, he didn't say anything. He Pasha just started walking. So that is like Rav Yosef, who says that both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda say that you would have to start walking. But according to Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda, you wouldn't have to say anything. And that's exactly what happened. He took one step to start traveling. And then Rav Nassan Bar Oshaya said, hey, why don't you stay here with me? So he went back. But since he was already, left, and so he was able to be Konesh Visa, Kili, who's traveling and has no food, he can be Konesh Visa up ahead, and without even saying anything. So then, the Gemara says, Lo, Kiraba Valiba to Rabbi Yehuda. No, you can even argue that, so in order for this to make sense, you'd have to assume that, that Rav Yehuda Bar Ishtasa said that he intended to be Konesh Visa 2,000 Am. So basically he took a step on the journey, so now he's traveling, and he says that he's going to be Konesh Visa in the middle, and that would be like Rabbah, who says that everyone agrees that you would have to say something, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that you would actually have to leave the city and be on your way. And Rashi says something very interesting. How come we would prefer to say it's like Rabbah rather than Rav Yosef? So Rashi says 2 lines before the Dibra Maskil Safek, he says, Rav Yosef, the Rabbah of Rav Yosef, Vilchsa Kirabah Levar Mitlas. Interesting. That when you have Machlokes between Rabbah and Rav Yosef, the halacha is always going to be like Rabbah. There are 3 exceptions to that. Therefore, if we can say that they were paskening like that Rav Yehuda Bar Ishtasa and Rav Nassan Bar Oshai were doing like Rabbah, that would be preferred because we generally pasken like Rabbah. Rav Meir Omer Kol Sheyachol La'arev Chulei. So Rav Meir says that anybody who's able to make an Eruv and doesn't make an Eruv, then he's going to be like a Chamar Gamal, he's going to be stuck in the middle. Meaning, in this case, where the guy turned back home, so he could have theoretically made an Eruv, right? Sent a Shliach or gone himself, whatever it might be, he could have made an Eruv, and he didn't. And now we're saying, wait, but maybe it was like he was Konesh Visa in the middle. Well, basically he's stuck because we don't know where he was Konesh Visa. Was he Konesh Visa at home, or was he Konesh Visa 2,000 Amos away? Because we don't know for sure now. So then he's kind of stuck in the middle, right? He can't walk past his house on the other side because maybe he was Konesh Visa by the Eruv, and he can't walk past the Eruv because maybe he was Konesh Visa at his house. So it says the Gemara, Hatanina Chadazimna. We already know this from Daf Lamed Hey. It says Safek, that when it comes to a Safek, so for example, if you have you're an Eruv Tchumen that went outside of the Tchum, and we don't know if it happened before Shabbos or on Shabbos. So it's a Safek if it was Konesh, if it was in a good place at the time of Shvisa, of when Shabbos came in or not. So Reb Meir Reb Yehuda Omim, how is a Chamar Gamal? That Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda say that this is a Chamar Gamal situation, that he can only walk between his house and the Eruv, because we don't know if it was Konesh Visa or not. So we see that in a situation when we're not sure, we say Chamar Gamal. So Amar of Sheishes, so if Sheshes says, well, the reason why we need both is because Lo Tema Time Reb Meir Safek Erev Safek Lo Erev Hu Dave Chamar Gamal. Don't say that, because I may have thought to say that in the case of the Safek, in the case where your mamish put out an Erev, right, and you're not sure if it rolled out of the Tchum before Shabbos or on Shabbos, i.e. if it rolled out of the Tchum before Shabbos, well then at the time of Ben Hashmashos you weren't Konesh Visa, so therefore it didn't work. But if it was still there when at Ben Hashmashos, well then it did work, and we're not sure. So in that case, I would say that Reb Meir would say that you're a Chamar Gamal. However, Aval Vade Lo Erev, but in this case, where he certainly did not put out an Erev, that's for sure. The question is, can we assume that since he left already, then it would be enough for him to be considered an ani, and he could say something, and it would be enough to verbally make an Eruv, right? So I might think that in that case, since he's not actually making an Eruv, well then, lo ave chamar gamal, it wouldn't be a chamar gamal, ela afilu vadai. So if Sheshes is saying, the point is that even when certainly vade lo Erev, even in a case where he certainly did not put out an Erev, have a chamar gamal, it would be this Chamar Gamal situation where it would be stuck in the middle to Acha Vade Lo Erev V'Kav Chamar Gamal, because in this case he certainly did not put out an Erev, and yet we see that Reb Meir is saying that the same Chamar Gamal would apply here as well. New Mishnah. Mishayatza chutz l'tchum. Afilu ama achas lo yikanes. Says the Tanakama, somebody who leaves the Tchum Shabbos even one step. No, not step. One ama. Lo yikanes. He can't come back in. Although technically we said that an ama is a middle-sized step. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Shtayim yikanes shalosh lo yikanes. Rabbi Eliezer says if he goes 2 amas outside of the Tchum, well, he could still come back inside. 3 amas, then he can't come back inside. As we learned the other day, it has to do with the overlapping Tchumen, right? Because according to Rabbi Eliezer, he's in the middle, right? We treat the Tchum, the Dalet Amos, as if he's in the middle and he has 2 amas on either side. So therefore, if he's outside, the 2 amas outside, he's still kilu overlapping with the Tchum. Amr B'Chanina, says Reb Chanina, Raglo achas b'socha tchum, Raglo achas chutz tchum. So says Reb Chanina, if he has one leg outside of the tchum, but he still has one leg inside the tchum. Okay? So Raglo achas b'socha tchum, Raglo achas chutz tchum. He's got one leg in the tchum and one leg out of the tchum. Lo yikanes, he cannot go back in. He just can't move. He's got to stand there with his, feet apart. Hopefully he did this around Shalosh Shudas time, but no guarantees. I hope he didn't do this around Kabbalah Shabbos time, Tichsiv, as the pasuk says, Imtashim mishabbos aglecha, right? The pasuk says that you have to, if you stop from walking too far on Shabbos. So we read it raglecha, which is plural, but it's written raglecha, which is singular. So raglecha ksiv, it's written raglecha. So even one leg, if one leg goes outside the Tchum Shabbos, sorry, Buster. But 1 second, we have a brayso that says raglo achas b'socha tchum, raglo achas chutz l'tchum yikanes. We have a brayso that says that if he's got one leg outside the tchum, one leg inside the tchum, just no big deal. Bring it back in. So the Gemara answers amani acherim. No, that brayso is specifically acherim. That's specifically the opinion of acherim who says that you can come back into the tchum. Titania, as we learn in the brayso, acherim omim say acherim l'makom shirubo hu nizkar, that it goes based on where the majority of his body is, and the majority of his body is still inside the tchum. Fine. Ikadam, those who say, Amr Reb Chanina, says Reb Chanina, Ragla achas b'socha tchum, Ragla achas chutz l'tchum. If he's got one leg inside the tchum, one leg outside of the tchum, yikanes, he can come back in. Tichsiv m'tashiv m'shabbos aglecha, as the pasuk says, m'tashiv m'shabbos aglecha, and even though it's read raglecha, which is plural, even though it's written raglecha, which is singular, raglecha karinan, we read it raglecha, which is plural, that you would need to have both feet outside of a Tchum Shabbos, and if you only have one foot outside of Tchum Shabbos, you could still come back in. Ve'atanya, but 1 second, after Rabbi Chanina say that, we have a brayso that says, lo yukanis, he wouldn't be able to come back in. So hudama ka'acherim, Rabbi Chanina holds like acherim, that you, the Tani l'makom shubo nizkar, who says that we learn a brayso that Acherim says that he can go based on where the majority of his body is. Therefore, says Rabbi Chanina, even if one leg is outside of the tchum, he could still come back in. Okay, so two different ways of understanding Rabbi Chanina. According to the first way, Rabbi Chanina said that one leg outside of the tchum, he can no longer come back in. According to the second way, Rabbi Chanina says that one leg outside of the tchum, he could just bring it back in. In the first case, he's saying not like Acherim. In the second case, he's saying like Acherim. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Shtayim Yikanes Shalosh Lo Yikanes. Rabbi Eliezer says that if he has he leaves the tchum 2 amos, he can come back in. Shalosh Lo Yikanes, but 3 amos he cannot come back in. Ve'atani, but we learn in the brayso Rabbi Eliezer Omer Achas Yikanes Shtayim Lo Yikanes. But 1 second, we have a brayso which says that according to Rabbi Eliezer, if he leaves the tchum 1 amma, he can come back into the tchum. But if he leaves 2 amos, he can't come back into the tchum. What's going on? Our Mishnah says 2 amos, he still can come back in. Lo kash, it's no problem. Hada'akar chada v'kam atarte, right? Hada'akar tarte v'kam atlos. That when in our Mishnah, right, it's saying, what does our Mishnah say? The concept of Ezra Shtayim Yikanis, that if he goes out 2, meaning that he left 1, but he's now standing in the second one. Right, but if he leaves the second and now he's in the third one, so then it's a problem. Right, hada'akar tarte v'kam atlas. Right, where if meaning when it says in our Mishnah, when it says that if he's in the second one, it means that he left the first one but he's standing in the second one. When the brayso says that if he leaves 2 amos, then he can no longer come back in, it's talking about where he passed 2 amos and now essentially he's 3 amos away. right? So in our Mishnah, when it says that if he leaves 2 amas, he can come back in, it means that he left 1 amma and now he's standing in the 2nd amma. When the Brisa says that if he goes 2 amas, he can no longer come back in, it means that he mamish passed 2 amas, and therefore he's in the 3rd amma. We learn in the Brisa, but 1 second. We learn in the Brisa that Rabbi Eliezer says that even 1 amma, he can't come into the Tchum. So what are you going to do about that? I mean, most you could say is that he's standing in the 2nd amma, but I thought the 2nd amma is still okay. So Kitanya lemoded. That's talking about somebody who's measuring, meaning somebody who was Kona Shvisa in some place, and now he's allowed to walk 2,000 amas. So he's measuring how far he can walk. So he takes 2,000 middle-sized steps, and he sees, oh gosh, I'm mamish just 1 amma away from the Tchum Shabbos. We say that nonetheless you can't even step that 1 amma in, right? It's not, as we learn in the Mishnah, v'lamoded she'amu nosen lo apayim amma afilu sof midasu kala b'ma'ara. Right? We say that when you're measuring your 2,000 amas to see how far you can go, you're not allowed to go past your 2,000 amas, even if it ends like in the middle of some cave. You can't just explore the cave. You can't go past 2,000 amas. So therefore we see that when somebody is measuring how far he can walk, and he sees that there's only 1 more amma to go, he still would not be able to cross that 1 amma past his 2,000 amas that he's allowed to walk to go into the next Tchum Shabbos. Masnis and new Mishnah. Somebody who it became dark and he's outside of the Tchum of his city. Afilu amma achas lo yukanes. He can't even go 1 amma into the Tchum. Meaning, if when it gets dark, the Tchum that he has ends 1 amma away from the Tchum of his city, he can't go into the Tchum of his city. Reb Shimon Omer, afilu chamesh esrei amos yukanes. Reb Shimon says, no, even if you still have 15 amas to go to get to the Tchum of your city, no problem. You can still go into the Tchum of the city. How come? Shina mishuchos mimatzin samidos mipnei atoin. Because the truth is that the people, I guess they would put markers outside of the city to show you how far you're allowed to walk, right? So when you get up to 2,000 amas, there would be a marker to say, hey, don't walk past here. It would be past the Tchum Shabbos. So basically, if you're trying to calculate how, if your Tchum is going to end within the Tchum of your city, right, and you see, oh no, I'm like mamish just 1 amma away, Reb Shimon is saying 1 amma, that's no big deal. Basically that marker, the people who measure the markers always kind of make them closer than they're really supposed to be, so that just in case people go too far, they can always turn back and they won't actually leave the Tchum Shabbos. So Reb Shimon is saying, even if there's like 15, you have like 15 amas to go. It's not exactly 15, meaning the point is, even if you have a bunch of amas to go, you can still go into the Tchum because the Tchum is likely going to be, you can assume that the Tchum is actually further than the markings indicate, because they were because they were concerned that people might make mistakes. It says the Gemara Tanim Pnei Toya Amida, because people might make a mistake of the measurement and accidentally go outside of the Tchum Shabbos and be stuck. So the people who would measure the Tchum, they would actually make it smaller. And I guess that the assumption is that if you would have been able to get into the Tchum Shabbos, then I think you would be able to go home. We're going to have to see these Gemaras. I think they come up in another 10 daf or so, about these halachas, about, how far you're allowed to walk into your city, right? Because we had that question about, if your Tchum Shabbos ends like mamish at the entrance of the city. So it sounds like you wouldn't be allowed to go into the city, but we have to understand exactly how that works. Because, for example, like this sounds like if you'd be able to get into his Tchum Shabbos, well, then already you'd be able to just go home. So we're going to have to figure out how exactly we treat the end of the 2,000 amas and under what conditions you'd be able to walk in the city past your 2,000 amas. At when is it like the whole city considered like Dalet Amas or whatever? Things like that. Hadron Alach Mishotziu, friends, that is the end of Perek Mishotziu. That is the end of the 4th Perek of Masechta Ayruvin. So, we're just about halfway through the Masechta, which is pretty cool. Cool. So, the main, I think, sugya today was really the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Meir about that, and also it ended up being that machlokes in Reb Yehuda and Reb Yossi Reb Yehuda about somebody who leaves one city to go to the next city, in terms of being kona shvisa in that way. So we had a machlokes between Rabbah and Reb Yosef about how to understand the machlokes between Reb Yehuda and Reb Yossi Reb Yehuda. That according to Rabbah, both Reb Yehuda and Reb Yossi Reb Yehuda agree that he would have to, say something. It would have to be say that he's being kona shvisa. but according to Rabbi Yehuda, he would have to actually leave his city. According to Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, he wouldn't have to leave the city. According to Rabbi Yosef, he says that everyone agrees that you'd have to leave the city, but Rabbi Yehuda says that he would have to verbally say that he intends to be Konesh Visa after 2,000 Amos, and Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda says that he wouldn't have to say anything. Reb Meir's opinion on the matter was, well, since he had ended up turning back and going home, he would actually have to be ma'ariv b'pas. And if he's not ma'ariv b'pas, well, then it becomes a chamar gamal situation where he's kind of stuck in the middle, because we don't know if he was konesh shvisa in his house or at the 2,000 amma mark. That was Daf Nun Beis. I hope you enjoyed it. Peace out.